session. So I hope that's fine. We will make it available to all our network after that.
We better be careful.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A very good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on which part of the world you're joining us from. Welcome to the ninth panel of the In Conversation with Clicks series, organized this time under the theme, The Impact of COVID-19 on University Research and International Cooperation. For those of you who are joining us for the very first time, my name is Nariman Hashhamu, and I'm privileged currently to be leading a regional organization which was established in 2012 that with the pandemic has expanded to become more global in nature, working today with over 160 universities and colleges, as well as several associations and ministries of higher education from more than 21 countries. We primarily specialize in providing training and capacity building opportunity, as well as consultancy services specifically geared towards the higher education sector and in line with our 5 areas of expertise, which include leadership development and governance, strategy development, quality and accreditation, innovative learning and teaching, including different forms of technology integration and research. In addition, throughout the years, we have strived to establish different platforms to bring in various sectors, various stakeholders in the sector together. To that extent, we launched in 2013 the MENA Higher Education Leadership Forum. We've launched the MENA Association of University Presidents in collaboration with the Association of Arab Universities, the Voice of Higher Education, and very recently, this series of panel discussions. This particular series aims at providing a platform for in-depth discussion and insight around the impact of the pandemic on the sector and how the sector is navigating through these difficult times and planning for the new normal while ensuring it continues to build resilience and agility. We attempt to select themes which are of relevance to our region, but as well as to the global context. And we always appreciate input from our participants on future themes and topics that you would like us to address. Please feel free to share with us your views on the chat box and we will take them into consideration. Let me start to I would also like to remind you that you can interact with our panelists through the question and answer feature, not the chat box. So if you can just please make sure that if you have any question throughout the session, you can post your question there, and we will try to address as many questions as possible towards the end of the session. We are actually expecting participants from more than 40 countries. We're also broadcasting on our YouTube channel and on the Voice of Higher Education. Now, without any further ado, may I introduce our panel chair for today, Professor Kurt de Ketelaar. I hope I pronounced it properly. And I know that I will not do him justice by presenting all his achievements, but just to give you an idea about our chair today, Professor Kurt is since 2017 the chairman of the Sustainability College of Bruges in Belgium, and he's a full professor of environmental energy, climate, and construction law at the University of Leuven. Since July 2009, he serves also as the Secretary General of the League of European Research Universities and Association of 23 leading comprehensive and research-intensive universities promoting the interests of frontier research, innovation, and education with the European Union institutions. Prior to that, he chaired the Flemish Energy Regulator from 2012 to 2017 and was the chief legal advisor and the chief of staff of the Flemish Minister of Public Works, Energy, Environment and Nature. Professor Kurt received several recognitions, including honorary doctorate by University of Edinburgh and the Scaliger Medal by Leiden University in the same year. He also received the University Medal of the University of Geneva in 2019. He's a member of numerous advisory boards, including the high-level advisory board of the Insight Foresight Institute in Madrid, and we are also privileged to have him serve on our international advisory board. Upon the invitation of the European Commission, he became a member of the Open Science Policy Platform and the ABC Consultation Forum. Without any more delay, Professor Kurt, the floor is yours to lead the panel today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Narimane, for this kind introduction, and good afternoon to everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are. I send you sunny greetings from the historical center of the city of Bruges in Belgium, where it is a lovely day. So I hope the same for you. Welcome at this meeting, this online meeting here today, where we, as Narimani already indicated, will try to shed our lights on the impact of COVID-19 on university research and international cooperation. For those of you who are active in the academic sector, in the higher education sector, who are linked to that, you all will know that the past 12, 13 months have been quite an exceptional period in which we have seen that the impact of this pandemic on research and education has been enormous. We had to change our educational approaches, research facilities, labs, which were not involved in medical research, to a large extent had to shut down. We had to end, as universities, exchange programs. We had to stop with physical scientific conferences. Research funding suddenly reduced in a number of areas, in a number of countries, with a consequence for the pipeline of research projects that all of us are having. But at the same time, I must say it was not all negative. On the contrary, the academic world, the higher education sector, has shown over the past 13 months what a flexible sector it is. We have switched to online conferences, we have switched to online education, we have switched to global research projects, collaborative projects have been never so popular and successful as over the past year, I would say. We have seen substantial innovation across the board in research, collaboration, and scholarly activities. And hopefully, we will have learned from those 13 months, and we will be able to take with us a number of important lessons learned from those 13 months into the next phase once this pandemic is behind us. So this is the very broad theme that we would like to discuss this afternoon, and we will do that by focusing with our panel on six specific issues. On the one hand, we will see for our panel members and their institutions what has been the impact for them over the past year. Secondly, we will have a look at how they look at the future, what is for them the new normal, and what will they take with them from those past 13 months into the future. We will have a closer look to the impact on future research and future international cooperation. And also, what is not unimportant, we will also have a look on what has been the impact now as well for staff members and for students in our institutions, because a lot can also be said about that. And we will end this afternoon, so more or less within 85 minutes or something like that, by a kind of closing question, namely, what is now the future for higher education in the post-COVID world, and what will be the future role of the higher education sector in this post-COVID world. So this will be the overall approach for our discussion this afternoon. As I said, we will do that through a panel discussion, through a dialogue with 6 people, but also with every now and then we will try to put in a poll question so that all of you who are joining us online can also give some feedback on a number of the issues that we will be discussing. As you already saw in the introductory clip, we will have this panel discussion this afternoon with 4 eminent colleagues. First of all, we have Professor Francisco Marmoleo with us this afternoon, who is the Education Advisor at the Qatar Foundation Chairperson's Office in Qatar. We have Dr. Stephen Griffiths with us, who is the Senior Vice President for Research and Development at Khalifa University of Science and Technology. We have Dr. Ashwin Fernandez among us, who is the Regional Director for QS for the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia. And finally, we have from the United States, Dr. Irma Becara with us. Irma is the President of Marymount University. So together with all of them, we will try to have a interesting exchange of ideas on these specific issues. So let's start off, I would say, and immediately get into the experiences that all of us had over the past 12 to 13 months. What has this COVID-19 pandemic done with your institution? And perhaps I start with Steve as being one of the people who is in the leadership of a university. He certainly can tell us quite a lot about how he has experienced the past 30 months. Steve.
Well, thank you, Kurt, and thanks to Clix for inviting me to this very interesting event. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a difficult time. I think like most universities, Khalifa University, very quickly on, when we saw the social distancing requirements starting to become very prominent, we needed to get very well attuned to digitalization. And so very quickly, we moved much of our operations onto online formats. We had to adopt systems which I hadn't been using at all. I mean, I'd always been signing off contracts and documents in paper. And quickly we had to go to systems like DocuSign, which allowed us to do contract development, contract sign-offs online. So those types of moves online became very rapid and very quick, but they were effective. Not just the research work that we were doing that went online. We also had, of course, our classes went online when the students weren't able to be in class together. So we had to move the education there. And we had to have a lot of the conference work, a lot of the events that we were doing, they also had to go online. So I think the whole move toward digitalization was a big shift for KU, but it was good in the sense because we had built business continuity into our thinking. And so it was a test of how well we were able to execute on that. On the second line of thinking on the research side, which I oversee, that was a very big shift. In the pandemic, we really wanted to keep our research productivity going. We really wanted to keep the engagement going. And so moving online, of course, you can't do all your research online. So we had to find ways in which we were going to try to continue with the research activity, even though there were now social distancing issues, potential for infection of people that were close together and these kind of things. So what we did was we had to go into the laboratories and look at how we could operate with minimal number of staff in the labs, still able to do the jobs that they were set up to do. So we'd try to find the best, most effective way in which a laboratory could operate with minimal number of staff. When the staff came in, we want to make sure they are also, of course, free from COVID-19. So I don't know how many other countries are able to do this, but in the UAE, we're able to get the COVID-19 testing going fairly quickly and effectively, PCR testing. So we had a mechanism by which all the staff that came into the labs would have to show that they'd been recently tested. Starting off, it was a month, and then we went to more around a week to make sure that you were free from infection going to labs. So we had a way of going online and then still maintaining some of the activities in the laboratory. On the research side, what we were doing in the labs became much more responsive to the pandemic itself. So there were research activities, of course, that we're trying to carry on from before the pandemic. But once we realized that there was sort of a national priority, which I think will be a theme of this entire discussion, we had to respond to doing different types of research which would help the UAE respond to the pandemic. And so at KU, some of the things we did was we put together a research program very quickly with the government that helped us look at epidemiology, so the spread of the disease, doing modeling, working with the health authority. We developed diagnostics and devices for detection, more rapid detection. PCR testing is great, but that was rather slow for us and for others. And so we started developing new technologies around detection of COVID-19. And we started looking at devices, medical devices. So many different places they had to look at developing respirators and ventilators, and the types of devices would help as medical technology for dealing with COVID. So we got into that very quickly. So our research programs not just continued, but they had to shift into national priorities around health. And finally, besides the research and going online, I think the last thing was budget impacts. Many on the panel probably have a similar situation. When the COVID-19 hit, all the governments that are funding research became very concerned about what would be the outlook for the budget for that year. So we were up and down seeing what the different levels of funding would be, and we had to deal with that for quite some time. We're still actually dealing with it. In the UAE, as you can imagine, much of the revenue that we get for our research budget is coming from oil revenue. And so we're kind of tracking this volatility in the international energy markets along with the research to create a challenge. So I'd say those things, going online, trying to create research continuity, changing research, and then dealing with budget has been the types of issues we've been dealing with at KU.
Okay, perfect, Steve. So an important major shift online, as many universities worldwide, also consequences for research, to which we come back later in the debate. But let's first go to Irma, because I think that Irma had a completely different experience at her institution, which not shifted completely online. Irma.
Good morning or good evening, everybody. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Wish I was face to face with you all, but that will come in due time. Marymount University is located just a few miles from our nation's capital. We're in Arlington, Virginia. And of course, in March, we were forced to pivot to remote education. We are very traditional education, so the majority of our courses are carried on a face-to-face format typically. So, but our faculty, I think that there's somebody that just joined. Yeah, our faculty were able to pivot to remote education quickly, which was really a tremendous effort. 700 courses shifting to remote education in a matter of days. So something we're very proud of. So we were able to manage to keep students learning and continuing towards graduation. But about a month and a half into this shift in education mode, we actually asked our students, how are we doing? And what we heard from them was, thank you for keeping us safe. We appreciate all the efforts. We don't like studying remotely. We find that it's very distracting. I'm here with my siblings, with my parents. I'm distracted by the internet. So at that point, we realized that as soon as we were able to come back to a face-to-face or hybrid environment, it was important for our students that we try to do so. Back in June, the state allowed us to repopulate the university, and we actually welcome our students in August. 80% of our students opted to return to campus in August, which is interesting. And you may recall that around that time in the United States, Immigrations and Customs, they issued information that foreign students could not attend university if the university was primarily online. So given Marymount's strong international student population, we have 20% of our student body is international from all over the world, 78 different countries. We felt even important for that group of students that we were educating our students in some kind of a face-to-face or hybrid environment. So we restructure all the places where students eat, where they live, all the students moving to single residence halls, in the places where we work, so that we could respect social distancing guidelines. And I have to share with you that we managed to teach the entire fall semester with very low COVID positivity rates. Less than 2% of our faculty, staff, and students were COVID positive. There were no hospitalizations, no casualties. And really everything was focused about keeping things safe, wear your mask at all times, unless you are by yourself in your room, socially distance, cleaning. We've been spending a lot of money cleaning, and daily monitoring of symptoms. As we were able to, and now talking a little bit about research, we were able to establish some collaborations that will allow us to do surveillance testing, join a group of other universities in the region. And we are doing a lot more aggressive surveillance testing in the spring. We are now in the spring, 90% of our students return to campus. And I'm proud to say that for the last 5 weeks, there's been no COVID cases on campus, even though not even the faculty and staff are still vaccinated, again, by following simple, staying safe, keep your mask on and practice social distancing. I'm also proud that our students are very respectful and they know what they need to do to be successful. So I think from our perspective, we felt it was important to listen to our students. What is it that they needed for them to be successful? They, both our students that are from the US as well as international students, pointed to the difference to be in a face-to-face or hybrid environment. And we were able to keep everybody safe and actually deliver education the students wanted it.
Okay, fantastic. And this is certainly kind of refreshing sound, I must say, which is a kind of future image for many universities out there, that they can go back to a situation where they have 80 to 90% of students on campus. So thanks, Irma. Let's perhaps check with Ashwin. what was the impact of this pandemic on an organization which is working on rankings, on publications, on conferences, seminars, and things like that, very much connected with the academic and higher education world. So Ashwin, have you been enjoying the sun for a year because nobody was doing anything, or what have you been doing?
Indeed, thank you so much, Kurt, for that, and thanks, Nariman, for inviting me. I think that's a brilliant question because it has been almost a year where we decided to shut office globally and work from home. And for us as a ranking agency with 500 staff members across about 7 offices around the world, it was a big challenge. And our ranking processes are done across almost 2 continents. We have offices in Asia and in Europe, which actually do a lot of work. Things move around. So to move the entire process, work from home or virtually, was a big challenge. And I think with that came a lot of stress on people, I think, because people are the most important part of the equation here. But given the fact that, QS from the beginning already had flexible working arrangements, we were able to adapt to this very quickly. And it's been almost a year. We completed a whole cycle of rankings in this year. So right from data collection to publishing about 7 ranking tables, all in a year. And besides that, we have also done a lot of studies and reports on the impact of COVID-19 on students, faculty, on universities, and so on. But I think more than us, I like the fact that we had the QS flag represented under my name because it didn't have a country flag. I think we represent a kind of the work being done by the higher education community. So I would like to take this opportunity to take this forward because I would like to share some of the insights into how universities, and I think University Khalifa and Marymount, and a lot of we'll hear from Francisco on Qatar Foundation later. Everybody has been able to go back into campus, sometimes minus the students, but work has resumed. The major lockdowns have eased. But a year after this, I think when we look at what's going to be the impact on rankings in the future, it is definitely going to be a relative impact because everywhere around the world, we've seen a decline in the research levels at institutions, so that might be surprising. And it might not decrease the proportion of the research, but it might sway the amount of research done in certain areas. So prior to COVID-19, the virology research, which includes influenza, represents less than 2% of all biomedical research. Today, that number is close to 20% a year later. So that is a big shift which has happened there. There are 3 areas I would like to focus in the UK because UK has been more open on the budget cuts and the news is spread out. The University of Edinburgh, which is one of the largest research universities in the UK, which submits over 2,500 projects worth over £1 billion a year. This, in the last year of COVID, has seen both a fall in the number of projects as well as the value of applications submitted. So there is definitely an impact which has been already recorded in the last year. Again, in the UK, the Cancer Research UK Fund announced cuts of almost £45 million to its research budget in December. Now, that means a lot of researchers are going to be impacted by this, maybe not today, but at least in the next 5 years, because this fund was for the next 6 years from the Cancer Research UK. The UK Research Council received, again, less funds compared to the previous years. So, it includes, engineering, physics, the Medical Research Council, as well as the Biotechnology and Biological Sciences Research Council, all have received less funds. So this is both going to impact funding for equipment, funding for people, funding for grants, and so on. So I think with the UK already announcing this well into the year last year, and followed by Europe as well, and this change is going to affect everyone in the next coming months. And unfortunately, this might not be captured in rankings as soon as we want them, because there is definitely a lag. In the horizon, Europe has almost 5 billion euros cut of their budget as early as July 2020. That affects also the Erasmus Plus project, which they have for student exchange, which will see a cut of 3.4 billion euros. China, which may have not been very open in this kind of announcements in the past, already is talking of slashing about 13.4 million yuan, which is I think $2 million in its 2020-2021 research budget. So that includes Jiangnan University, China Agriculture University, perhaps not the top tier Chinese university, but at least there are substantial budget cuts coming. Countries like India actually have last year announced more funding for research, but it's probably not trickled down to the universities as yet. So we are yet to see what's going to happen. But my feeling is that last year has been a challenging year. It has impacted research. And while every institution has transformed itself, been more agile, has come with better ways to spend and manage their funds and research activities, I think there's going to be a relative impact of this on most institutions over the next few years, while we're still really for the impact of COVID-19.
Okay, thank you, Ashwin. This was also already a perfect introduction to the tackling of the next question on research, so we can come back to that later on. Let me wrap up for this first round with Francisco, how this has affected this pandemic, how this has affected a broad and diverse organization like Qatar Foundation, I would say. Francisco, your mic is still off.
Yeah, thanks, Kurt, and thanks, Nariman, for the kind invitation to participate in this panel with the distinguished group of colleagues. It has been also a very interesting mix, sort of a set of factors that has impacted the way we work at Qatar Foundation. Let me just start by briefly referring to what Qatar Foundation is. It is an umbrella of more than 50 different organizations, many of them educational and research related, which are all of them working together towards unlocking the human potential in Qatar and beyond through interventions in education, science, research, and community development. So as part of this very unique ecosystem that brings together more than 22 educational institutions from kindergarten to doctoral education, all of them located in one physical location, which is the Education City compound. It's a 14 million square meters facility that brings together all these institutions in a very vibrant and interesting interaction. So at Qatar Foundation, among those 22 educational institutions in which are enrolled more than 8,000 students, we have 9 higher education institutions, including very well-known institutions from the US, Carnegie Mellon, Northwestern, Georgetown University, Texas A&M, and our own home ground university, which is Hamad bin Khalifa University. So what happened here? Well, first of all, it is interesting because many countries in the world, one of the challenges they faced were that they were not prepared for the pandemic. Interestingly, in the case of Qatar, because the previous geopolitical conditions of the region and the blockade that the country was experiencing, there was a contingency plan. The contingency plan was aimed at addressing other potential problems, but that contingency plan was properly used to address the new contingency, which was the pandemic. So this allowed at Qatar Foundation to transition from the face-to-face teaching learning to the remote teaching learning in only 2 days. So it took only 2 days to do that entire transition to a remote teaching and learning. So that was a big advantage that we had, again, for other reasons, but again, it was useful for us in this particular case. The second challenge we faced was, of course, that even though the transition was made, as in many more countries in the world, not all the teachers were totally prepared for that. So there was, as it happened in many countries, a massive effort in just retooling everybody in order to be able to make sure that they will be able to continue activities on that. Second one was that a number of international students, we have students from 50 different countries, went back home, but a number of they decided to stay here So for us to put together the right infrastructure in order to address their needs, not only physical and academic, but also mental, was a significant challenge in which also we have to learn very fast about how to cope with that. So in summary, the whole pandemic, which and the lockdown, which started just a year and 1 week ago, has been a tremendous sort of, I might say, a social laboratory for us to learn very quickly about how to address challenges that we were not being seen at that magnitude before. And again, the limitations that already were present, there has been a constant work to make sure that that works. For instance, something that it was not as efficient before was having the channels of communication between the different groups of the different institutions being housed at Education City, that because of the pandemic, now they had to learn very quickly how to connect, how to make sure that things will work smoothly in order to avoid any potential crisis. Now, this is on the, I might say, a problematic side. On the positive side, there has been many interesting things that we have taken advantage of by seeing the pandemic as an opportunity. One example is that during the entire year, we took the opportunity to conduct a very comprehensive and detailed strategic planning process for higher education. In fact, just yesterday, it was just approved the new higher education strategy at Qatar Foundation. So being outside of the day-to-day pressures, we were able to work together with a lot of constituents, both internal and external, in rethinking what do we mean by higher education, not for today, but for the future, to rethink what we have achieved, and of course, to rethink how do we want to address the challenges and opportunities of the future with a renewed higher education strategy. So for us, the pandemic has a very significant positive endeavor, which is that we were able to reanalyze, restudy, and I hope to reimagine and to rebuild our higher education for the future at Qatar Foundation with very interesting components that now we are ready to start launching. The second lesson that we have learned and a positive endeavor that we have had is that we have seen a significant, I might say, greater engagement of our higher education institutions at Qatar Foundation with the community. And that applies not only to research and research-oriented efforts, that applies not only to the typical community engagement activities, but to a sort of a different way to see the community as part of the symbiosis, I might say, of what Qatar Foundation is and what our institutions are here. Something that, for instance, historically, it is being neglected globally is how universities can connect more effectively with the previous levels of education. In the case of Qatar Foundation, it is natural because as part of our ecosystem, we have a number of pre-university institutions. But all those connections that we already had and that we already took for granted, because the crisis, we were able to reevaluate them and to re-energize them in order to be even more effective as universities in connecting with all these pre-university institutions, not only at Qatar Foundation, but also outside of Qatar Foundation. So there has been a significant effort that is being conducted now in order to support the continuation of education of the previous levels of education, not only university, but previous levels of education, in which Qatar Foundation institutions are heavily involved, both with our internal institutions, but also with the other institutions outside of Qatar Foundation. And again, in summary, a new world for us. All of us continue learning, significant challenges, but also very important opportunities not to be missed.
Okay, thank you very much, Francisco. And this is a certainly good bridge for our next round of questions dealing with the future and what we have learned from the past. But before we do that, let's have a first poll question which is looking at how universities and higher education institutions have been dealing with this pandemic.
Indeed, an interesting survey.
Yeah, and so the result is proactively engaging and addressing challenges ahead. I think that this has been indeed something that we have seen in many places where we have shown a lot of flexibility, learning by doing and things like that. And at the end of the day, offer the quality and the service that students and staff expect from us. Okay, thank you very much for this first poll. Let's go to our second round of...
Kurt, can I make a comment? Can I make a comment on this, Kurt? Because I think it is important. I'm very pleased that the audience considers that institutions are working proactively. However, I should caution that outside of higher education, the general perception is that higher education institutions have been only watching the thunderstorm to go, and that we in higher education are just very passively sort of retrenching ourselves. So I think it is important to keep in mind that, because it looks like our strategies to communicate to the world, but we are doing probably are not obtaining the expected results.
Well, that's certainly possible, and there are certainly places to imagine where this is set. But I've seen certainly here in a European context that in many countries, in fact, academics, university rectors and presidents really also have been taking the lead, not only behind the scenes, but also in a kind of very public way by speaking up and even by indicating to the political world and the political class, the governments, what had to be done, and that no time had to be wasted or that new directions had to be taken. So certainly, even to an extent, even that those experts and those rectors were also then at the end of the day criticized, because we saw them too much on television and things like that. But certainly in places they also have been publicly a very leading force in society, I would say.
Yeah.
So let's move to our second round, and I will combine, also looking at the clock, a number of issues that we had in mind. Namely, can we have a look at what we now have learned from all of this? What are you as a institutional leader, what are you going to take away from the past 13 months? How are you going to change your institution? And I would like to focus or have your answer focusing on the one hand, research. Ashwin already indicated budget cuts in many countries, in many parts of the world. So focus on research, and on the other hand, focus on international collaboration. With regard to research, we have seen certainly less money, but also more collaboration worldwide in looking for a vaccine, for example. The question also that raised in that discussion was how open can we be from an institutional point, from a legal point, from an economic point of view. Here in Europe, for example, there was a call that universities would give up all their IP rights vis-a-vis the vaccines that they were developing, because those vaccines, of course, have to save society. So the whole issue of open science, exchange of data, exchange of publications, even if that are not final documents yet, has been high on the agenda. And on the other hand, then the issue of international collaboration, we have seen a lot of collaboration, but also a lot of competition between countries, between institutions, not to talk about the vaccine production and delivery and distribution, for example. So let's go around the table again and see what are your views on that. And let's start again with Steve, I would say.
You gave me a lot to think about. So I'll try to package it up.
As a VP, you certainly have an answer to all those questions.
5-minute question, you don't expect less than a 5-minute response, I hope.
Yeah.
So it's actually excellent question, a number of different topics that we thought about a lot. And so I'll try to bring it from a research angle. If I were to consider what we really gathered from the pandemic and what lasting impacts the pandemic has, certainly health, that's now at the forefront. Ashwin mentioned the amount of health research happening. Beyond that, though, I think from the pandemic, we learned a lot about how quickly the world now is moving into what we call the fourth industrial revolution, digital technologies. We always said it's going to come. We always talked about the importance of it. Now it's here. Every industry and universities, I would include in that perspective, they've gone ahead by probably an acceleration of 5 years or 10 years in what they thought they'd be doing in digital. So the awareness of digitalization and proactive responding to digitalization in many ways is key. And also flexibility and resiliency. I can't understate enough, and this is going to come to my answer on your question about the research aspect. Resiliency is going to be playing with this for quite some time because there were a lot of countries that were unprepared initially to deal with the pandemic. And so that response they had was not sufficiently quick to get to where they wanted to go, simply because they had too much reliance externally. So on the research side, I'd say going forward, the awareness of how a global challenge like a pandemic can impact this will certainly stimulate more healthcare research. KU, we're doing that. We had a medical school already in the works, and now we're accelerating the research we're doing in healthcare. Beyond that, though, I think all countries now are going to look at climate change, sustainability, water, oceans, digital, not just from digital tools, but cybersecurity. If I were to say what are my top 3 threats, I'd say pandemics, epidemics, the focus on climate change, and then cybersecurity. Cyber terrorism, cyber warfare, cyber crime. The more we digitalize, the more we have these open platforms for which these cyber attacks can happen, and they can be destructive, extremely destructive. So I'd say on the research front, the areas in which we're moving and we're going to continue to move, where science, fundamental understanding, needs cooperation, needs collaboration, and needs openness, is going to be around those big items. We're talking climate, oceans, healthcare, and many different types of healthcare. So I know the EU is now looking at cancer very specifically. We have cardiovascular disease here in the region. So healthcare from many perspectives, maybe that'll be a little bit more regionally tailored, but certainly healthcare. And then the entire digital space, and I would say really importantly, we have to look deeply into cybersecurity. I think everybody needs to be looking at that very closely because it's a huge opportunity for challenges to arise. So I think science in an open sense is very important for many of these big picture issues, because in the pandemic we learned we didn't solve it yet, but you couldn't really effectively address COVID without having lots of international collaboration. So we should see more stimulation of that. On the flip side, I'll come back to resiliency. So, when you look at where countries want to go, they also found that, even though we're seeing today with semiconductor technologies, some countries which are holding all the cards, so to speak, and these technologies which we're basing more and more of our lives on, they're the ones that we have to always be dependent on. We need their supply. So when it comes to any type of imported technology, any type of technological capability, which we don't have in country, I think there's going to be more thought about how to try to bring that innovation inside the borders or inside the region so that we don't have to have so much external reliance. So I'd say on the science side, you're probably going to see more of these big ticket items that I talked about, global issues, being addressed cooperatively. On the innovation side, we may see more focus on trying to bring into the borders of countries the innovation and not being as open. We get further downstream. And so will we start our own semiconductor industries in every region? It looks like we're headed that way. The US wants to do it. Europe wants to do it. China's doing it. And that's going to be the platform for digital. You look at all these things we're doing around the wireless networking capabilities, the 5G discussions, and the US and China battle, all critical issues. Who owns the technology? Who do you have to rely on? Critically important. So as I think as we get forward into the future, trying to figure out where you draw the boundary on collaboration and competition, what level of innovation, where in that technology readiness spectrum you draw the line is going to be a differentiator. And so I think that, that'll be a very, very important topic and discussion going forward for many years now as a result of COVID-19. Kurt, you're on mute.
Kurt, you're muted. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed, the mute was on. So thank you, Steve, for this. This is certainly also something or developments that we see here in continental Europe, where this pandemic, be it cynical, is fitting very much into the so-called mission approach for research and innovation that the EU is now putting forward at high speed. The kind of putting a man on the moon approach to tackle all kinds of societal challenges with which we are confronted, and investing significant amounts of money in digitalization, in climate change research and things like that. So that's certainly very much in line with what you have been mentioning. Irma, perhaps from your side in the States, on research, on international collaboration, the impact of this?
Okay, so I wanted to quickly answer your question about what have we learned, and we certainly have learned much here in the United States as well. Much like you mentioned in Europe, university presidents here, we were faced on having to navigate what to do on our own. And interestingly enough, for those of you that follow American politics, also the whole how we faced the pandemic became very politicized along different lines of thought, if I may say, from a political perspective. I don't know how much that was evident in your own countries. And that also added an additional layer of complexity to what we were facing. There were three kind of big aha moments. Number one, for years, futurists on higher ed have said that universities as we know them will cease to exist and students will flock to studying remotely. Well, my big aha moment is that that's not going to happen. While there is a group of students that will prefer to study remotely because of maybe family reasons or perhaps because of job commitments, the majority of the students want to come to the classroom, to the traditional university, because it's not only the download of information that they receive from the professor, but it's equally how much they learn from each other. And in particular, in Marymount, that we have such a diverse environment with students from all over the world, the opportunity for them to be immersed in an environment where they also learn a global perspective. How do my classmates from Saudi Arabia, from Europe or Latin America or the US view a particular situation? So that was the richness of the traditional education was evident when students shared with us that they wanted to continue coming to campus. Number two, Marymount had been in a process to replace our ERP system for a cloud-based environment, Workday. What a business case for why we need to be on the cloud. Luckily, our HR component have been completely launched by then, and we were able to hire about over 100 people during the pandemic. It would have been completely different if we were using another system that it was not cloud-based. So we are continuing on our full rollout of a cloud-based system. And if you want to be prepared for future pandemics, I think that you have to look at your information systems and how they support the work you do every day. We also did something very strategic. And Professor Marmolejo shared about how his group went ahead and did a strategic plan. We actually restructure our academic structure, which was really innovative as well. We have been developing a plan for curriculum expansion, and we did a number of interviews with CEOs of companies. And believe it or not, it was easier to get them through Zoom than if we would have wanted to invite them on a face-to-face. And many of them made a point about how important interdisciplinarity is in the in the workforce of the 21st century. So we restructured the university from 4 schools and 26 departments into 3 colleges and 10 interdisciplinary schools. And we're very excited because this new academic structure is going to give us the freedom to really develop that the worker of the 21st century, the engineer that understands how to communicate well, or the clinician that understands business. And that's what we kept hearing over and over. So we also took the opportunity to do very strategic restructuring during this pandemic. I think one big final point that I wanted to make about future is how are we more resilient to pandemics moving forward, because this may not be the last pandemic that we ever witness. And here in the United States, the pandemic also made evident issues around equity. The fact that knowledge workers, those that were able to work remotely, were to a large extent college educated, and those that did not have college degrees were most impacted by the necessity to have to work on a face-to-face environment and not being able to work remotely. So I think it really created the opportunity for civil rights reckoning, if I may, in the United States, where we realized that the pandemic made very evident issues around equity and how do we as a nation move forward so everyone is afforded the same opportunity to get a college education. And in the future, if we ever face a pandemic, that we don't see a pandemic that has impacted Blacks and Hispanic in a disproportionate, as well as people from lower economic levels. So that's a quick summary about lessons learned from the pandemic.
Thank you very much, Irma, for this input. I don't know if Ashwin or Francisco still want to add something to this, because in their previous intervention, they already anticipated these issues. Francisco?
I just had a reflection on that, which I think it is important for what we are talking about. And it connects with what Stephen had indicated before. So, you know, there is no doubt that because the pandemic, there is increased research collaboration in the time of a scarcity of resources. However, Kurt, I have the impression that unfortunately there are winners and losers on this. And I think on the winning side, we find those disciplines which are, as expected, related to the sense of urgency that we are facing right now. And we see that all over the world. You know, there is an increased, collaboration and, of course, funding available for research related to issues directly connected to the pandemic. But I think the big, I don't say loser, but the big sector in research that is being affected because this transition in the priorities is the social science and humanities. And that is a sector that I think it is greatly affected. Probably Ashwin can provide some evidence on that. But, don't forget that the pandemic is not only an epidemiological problem. It is much more than that. Consequently, the solutions will not be only the vaccine. The solutions will go beyond the vaccine. In fact, there is much more complexity in the all issues related to the socioeconomic fabric in our communities that are dramatically affected by the pandemic, for which we need to have sound research. So I always made the call about the need to properly balance research priorities, not to miss the point about the importance of social sciences and humanities. Now, I can see, for instance, here in the case of Qatar Foundation, it was a very interesting combination. Emphasis or renewed emphasis on artificial intelligence, on precision medicine, on the genome project, on cybersecurity as well, very similar to what Stephen is referring to in the case of Khalifa University. But at the same time, we tried to compensate that by putting emphasis on family studies, mental health implications for communities, disruptive education, among all of the areas that also we consider important to stimulate in research in order to cope more effectively with the post-pandemic world. Now, in terms of lessons learned, Kurt, I'd like to mention briefly that in addition to efforts towards flexibilized learning, for which I really appreciate what Dr. Irma Becerra is referring to in terms of the way that they rearrange the whole set of multidisciplinary efforts at the institution. There are something very clear that we learned in terms of our international outreach in the Qatar Foundation, which I think it is applicable to many institutions. So we learned that, of course, first of all, we needed to review our strategic priorities as it connected to internationalization. Secondly, it was an opportunity also to review the partnerships we have, in which way partnerships are contributing or not to that renewed vision of our internationalization focus. Third, we had to work in redefining the incentive mechanisms that we have, because if we are not providing the right incentives to trigger some kind of behavior in the international effort, we might not be able to obtain good results. And third, and last, I think we also learned how to put together more effective measurement of internationalization efforts. Something that globally, I guess, not only Qatar Foundation, but globally we are learning out of this process, Kurt, is that internationalization should go beyond the traditional boundaries of just being seen as mobility. That internationalization at home, internationalization of the curriculum are the efforts that really are going to make possible for greater number of students to benefit from the idea of a global dimension into the day-to-day life as professionals in the community they live. If we keep focusing on mobility, guess what happens? There is no mobility of students. Consequently, that means that we have no internationalization. But if we focus on the overall picture by making sure that internationalization is available to all, not only to the 1%, 2%, or 3% of the students who participate in student mobility, consequently, we might be able to have a really impactful internationalization as translated into the preparation of the next generation of our leaders in our communities.
Okay, thank you very much, Francisco. And I would like
if you allow me to add,
Ashwin, if you allow me, I would like to go to our next topic and start with your poll question and then come immediately to you. So if Elena can put up our poll question number 5, that will make the link very nicely with student and staff that we will discuss in a second. So what can employers, industry do to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on job prospects for higher education graduates and researchers? So here we go, and the highest score for cross-industry collaborations to create more job opportunities. Ashwin, comments from your side, please, on this whole issue of what is the future staff, what is the future student going to look like, what is this whole pandemic changing in how we look at staff and students in the future. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kurt. And I think I would like to echo whatever my previous panelists have said. And I think one of the ills of COVID, lockdown, isolation, and all that associated which came with it is the inability to meet, to interact, to have the human touch, the lack of emotions or feelings when you could try to do as much as you can virtually. But there's definitely something which I think has brought about especially to faculty members and this could be mainly because one of the study we're doing is on residential universities where staff are still within the institution and students are perhaps not on campus, is something called social awkwardness, and the kind of challenges faculty have to deal with stress, with change, especially for faculty who have been there for many years particularly. And I think in the whole equation, institutions need to have some focus on the faculty as well, and how you could work on the well-being, how do you mentor and how do you put faculty under the wing of other faculties, have your coffee sessions virtually perhaps, but also try to meet and put them together in groups, perhaps on campus, and so on. So that's one of the areas I would like to focus on. The second area, which I think which is connected to research, is how do junior researchers progress in the future? Because I think that has been one of the biggest challenges over the last year. Conferences are being cancelled. Any kind of exchanges have not been happening, and they're going mainly virtual. And I would like to point to one particular report or a study by Ben from University of East Anglia, which says that the partnerships which tend to happen even with junior faculties, particularly when they produce papers with people who they have never met before, so socially distant authors, generally tend to produce lesser citations from these papers and get indexed in low-ranked journals. So there is a challenge with this long-term, which I think is the issue here. And here is how institutions work, and how we, as we come out of the pandemic, allow opportunities for meetings. And I'm not sure whether we can really go virtual for forever. But yes, there are markets like Dubai and UAE and I know places in India and Singapore where there are some kind of academic activities already starting, meetings already starting. So I think we need to work and see how do we integrate back into the world in the future. One of the challenges which will also remain, I think, even post-pandemic, is the willingness of faculty to travel. Because even though you're vaccinated, there's always a concern. So we might see a lag time of another 2 to 3 years before actually people start going out. But what is the short-term plan? How do you get how do you do away with socially distant authors coming together, collaborating? And Professor Francisco mentioned about also the challenge of humanities, and how do you provide funding for them? Because now a lot of institutions are looking at KPIs, are looking at what is the performance of faculty members, are they going to be counted? And I think I would really like at the end of March, when we get data, or early April, when we get data for the last year, see what kind of trends have emerged last year. Whether we are looking at a dip in humanities research last year. Are we looking at definitely there has been more produced, and quality is a concern there, definitely, because the peer review process for quite a lot of journals have just been tossed away. So that's some analysis. The same panel meets after a few months. We'll be able to elaborate and see what kind of impact does it have. So I would like to just add it to the previous panel question, and moving to the next one. Definitely the opportunity, the virtual opportunities, at least for now, for students to get internships would add value in the future. And how do we? There are many institutions already doing it. I've seen, we opened LinkedIn. I've seen many people already successfully progressing into providing internships, into everything virtual. But my concern still remains, it misses the human touch. The generation, the COVID generation, graduates which come out might not be perceived the same as the general ones, because you definitely miss the classroom experience, you miss the emotional connect with people. So how is that going to change, and what institutions play a role right now in bridging that would be important. And I think that's probably some of the other colleagues here can share on what they could be doing in those areas to bridge that kind of a gap in the students going out of university in the next 3 to 4 years.
Thank you, Ashwin. Very good comments. Thank you very much. Perhaps go to Steve and ask, at Khalifa University, of course, just like many other universities, you aim for the best students, you aim for the best staff members. Do you see a problem now in mobility coming out of this pandemic, that people, students, staff members avoid specific countries, go to specific countries, are reluctant to travel anyway, stay in their country? Any experience with that, Steve?
Well, this is an interesting question, because I think it depends on where you are. Your answer probably going to be a little bit different. In the UAE, what we've typically seen is the very, very smart, very bright Emirati students, they would look abroad. They would look in the US, they would look at the top universities in Europe. They would want to go outside of the country to get the top quality education, because it was the norm. We didn't have in the region, in any of the countries, really a precedence for very elite renowned higher academic institution educations. Now we're getting to the point where we have that ability to offer such an education, but I think if this pandemic hadn't come, it would have been more difficult to reverse the norm of going outside the country to get the best education. Now, to the point you brought up, there is this reservation about leaving country, and COVID aside, we now learn there are pandemics that happen. And if you talk to various people, they may say they're going to be more frequent than they had been in the past. Maybe, maybe not. But that's in the back of your mind now when you're thinking, are you going to stay in country or go abroad? So I think in the case of a country like the UAE, maybe it's the same for Qatar, maybe Saudi Arabia, you may be able to get better, higher quality students now to stay in country, which is a benefit. If you were a country that was very reliant on bringing in the best talent from outside, then you may have the flip. I mean, I don't necessarily have a way to solve the problem for any country which is not going to have a vaccine available in the near future. I mean, anybody that's thinking about spending any time in a sub-Saharan African country, Southeast Asian country, South America, it's going to be tough. I mean, I don't know whether those countries and their educational institutions are going to be able to attract talent, if at all, outside of country to create diversity. So I think, this is a question that's about perspective. In KU, we're looking, obviously, as I said, to bring the brightest students that are in country to stay with us. We still want to attract the best students from outside of country, but I don't know how you're going to bring a student very easily from the countries I mentioned, because just getting them in after knowing they've been in an environment where the COVID-19 risk is very high is going to put them in a whole different situation to be able to come into country. I mean, it'd be great to get students that could just seamlessly move back and forth, but if I have a student that comes from, again, sub-Saharan Africa, which is suffering from not having vaccination opportunity, how are they going to go to home country? They're going to get in here and then they're going to see their family. Are they always going to be remotely working? So I think these kind of issues are going to be facing us for a very, very long time. There's an inequality in the world now, just today, with vaccines just available, about how people can access those. Going forward, it's going to hurt work. It's going to hurt education. It's going to create a big divide globally. And I think that's as much of a concern as anything I have right now, is how we're going to be a global community when you have people with different levels of health status or protection against disease. COVID-19, of course, being the one that's prominent today.
Absolutely, absolutely. Very, very spot on, Steve. And perhaps, Irma, that you can add here. We have seen, obviously, under the previous president during the pandemic, that all kinds of hurdles were installed to keep students out of the country, avoiding that they could come in. On the other hand, limiting travel from outside, going outside of the USA. Any views from your side on this issue?
Well, a few things. Number one, we are witnessing under our new administration, President Biden, a very positive outlook for international students. There's a number of immigration system reforms that are on the table, eliminating discriminatory bans, protecting our dreamers, who are students that came to this country when they were little with their parents and they stayed, and giving them some kind of a path to citizenship. Allow international students, in particular in STEM fields, to receive work visas, and boost our collaboration for global science, joining again the Paris Accord for climate change. So we're very excited that we see what we're witnessing with this new administration is all the right moves. And we continue to see international students from really all over the world to have an interest to come to study in the United States. I think the only country that we're seeing a decline is China, but Canada, Brazil, UK, India, Pakistan, and the Middle East, all those countries we continue to see, which we are excited at Marymount, since such a large percentage of our student body is international, and we want it to remain that way. I am concerned, like Steve said, about the inequity in vaccine, access to vaccine around the world. Here in the United States, we've heard from President Biden that by July, we all will be vaccinated, the entire country. And I think as of today, about 1/3 of our country has already been vaccinated. About 100 million vaccines have already been distributed. So we're optimistic. For example, I'm about to send a message in the next couple of days, where we're anticipating back to normal by fall. So face-to-face with, of course, we will allow students that require it flexibility with a high flex environment. But I'm trying to gear everybody to get ready for what we're anticipating will be back to normal by August.
Okay, thank you very much, Irma. Looking at the clock, my dear friends, I think that it's time for us to move on to the Q&A section. I will come back with my final question to all of you after the Q&A session, but let's have a look at the Q&A if there are any interesting questions which we could submit to the panel. I see here one from Khaled Al-Sahili saying students have to be ready and engage actively in the process of long distance learning. How do the panelists see the readiness of the students to be active in such a system? How much are they willing to substitute the university life for easier education from home? And this certainly a good question with which we all have experience, of course, on a daily basis, and which very much also touches upon this long distance learning needs to have a certain level of quality. All universities switch from day one to day two to online education, but there is online education and online education. The level of quality of interaction can be very different. So I don't know, anybody, perhaps Francisco, to react?
Yeah, just briefly, Kurt. I think this is one of the areas that I think all of us collectively in higher education have to learn quickly about what it works and what it doesn't work. You know, I think there was a kind of misleading idea that transitioning from the classroom to the Zoom sort of sessions will be relatively easy. And of course, it worked, but it's not the panacea. And I think we are learning quickly that students are not precisely happy with that. There are surveys showing constantly that students are dissatisfied in general with that particular transition. As Coslin indicated kind of sarcastically, you know, the teaching in the classroom is the best way to teach, but the worst way to learn. And unfortunately, this has been translated into the Zoom. I remember a study in Mexico showing that 8 out of 10 students expressed negative opinions about the remote teaching learning activity. So we have learned many things. We have learned that, you know, lectures should be shorter, that we need to provide meaningful education to the students. We need to go back to the Socratic method in making sure that students are really learning something important, connected to the realities of the world in which they are going to be living. And again, there is a significant room for us to learn about it. Now, we are missing globally the unique opportunity to learn from this social experiment by observing systematically what happens in the classroom, in the new classroom, and of course, by adapting those kind of lessons learned as soon as we can to make of education a much more meaningful experience for the students. It's quite a significant challenge. I think that one, in addition to the challenge, as one of the questions in the audience was related to the a digital gap, and then the problems of the learning deficit associated with many students which are not able to continue any type of education. About 40% of the students globally in higher education which are not benefiting from any type of remote education at this point. Those are realities that we have to face. The third problem we are facing on that, Kurt, and I finish, is about how to adapt our learning assessment systems, because again, that is something that also we need to reinvent in the new reality.
Yeah, spot on, Francisco, very much in agreement there. Let's have a look at another question from Amani Saharan. Has there been any change in the standards of research submission, or COVID-19 not affected research standards and innovation that should be probably, especially in the research implementation? I don't know, Steve, perhaps something for you to comment upon?
I think, you know, it depends on how you want to direct the question. I mean, I think on the standards for research, you mentioned previously, Kurt, there have been many publications now getting rapidly accelerated because it's been a global response to a significant issue. And so we've been trying to disseminate the knowledge very quickly. which, you know, it has up and downs. I'm not a huge fan of archive server and these kind of different repositories for getting the best peer-reviewed, or it's not peer-reviewed at all information. I do think we have to make sure that we're going through a scientific process to get the knowledge that we're creating properly through review process, peer review process, and making sure that we're creating that high standard. Now, innovation question, I think, is a little bit different. I don't really think the science and the quality of the science was hurt. I just, you know, I put some, you know, make sure that there is that level of robustness that we always had continuing on. On innovation, I think this has been a good opportunity to show how university can really contribute to innovation ecosystems more so than ever. Many universities, Khalifa University included, when we did this response I was talking about, we tried to help the government and those industries that were working with the government to be able to provide solutions to the pandemic. It showed that we can mobilize pretty quickly to move up the readiness, the technology readiness spectrum to deliver solutions. You know, things like wastewater testing to look where COVID might be having an outbreak of COVID-19. We scaled that up, we did that. Now we're part of the government response to understand where COVID outbreaks may be happening simply by surveillance of wastewater. Other universities around the world have done that kind of thing. We certified our laboratory, our biotech laboratory, to be a COVID-19 test center. So we do the official testing, which then is reflected on the contact tracing app we have in the country. So I think trying to move the university into the framework of contributing beyond just the knowledge generation has been something that's been showcased in many places now, more so maybe in the past. And if we can contribute in that way, more so in the future, in all the areas I was talking about before, climate, we look at the digital space, cybersecurity, healthcare, of course, is big. If we can continue to now move between science and innovation and do it well, I think that could be a positive for the universities as a result of the pandemic. So I don't think we've been harmed. I think there's been things that have happened which have been as a response that was necessary to get knowledge out, but we can keep the rigor, and I think we can build on the innovation that's been happening.
Thank you, Steve. I would say for Europe, certainly this would be the same answer. I haven't seen any changes in evaluation, judgment, peer review, and things like that. So in that sense, I think that we are still on the safe side. Perhaps let me take one issue and bring to the table an issue which is perhaps, I don't know to what extent it is just an issue that is living very much in continental Europe, but Khaled Al-Sahili is writing in one of his questions, well, of course, we have been spending much more hours on online lecturing, but on the other hand, I have more time since I am at home most of the time. But certainly here I have seen that the pandemic and the whole crisis and the whole workload that people have nowadays, not only for their day job as an academic, but also for the childcare that they have as a family, that very much this again all has been put on the side of our female colleagues. And a lot of people here are claiming that this whole pandemic has been a setback in this gender balance that we have to reach in our academic activities and in our workforce. That certainly female colleagues have been disadvantaged over the past 13 months through the present situation. I don't know if this is also something that you have been experiencing, Irma, for example.
Yes, here in the United States, we've seen a record number of women who voluntarily left the workforce, significantly higher than men. And I'm sure maybe in your country is the same. Many of our schools remain closed even as we speak, and they're slowly opening up. It's also put tremendous stress on our students who have been often taking care of their siblings so the parents can go to work. So we have seen as students apply, maybe a student that was on track with pretty good grades through high school, and then in this last year of high school, their grades really falling because they've had to take responsibilities at home, helping to take care of their little brothers and sisters who are not going to school, and mom and dad had to go to work. So I think that there's going to be a long tail effect in terms of the impact on higher ed, on women in the workforce, but also perhaps in a generation that would not give themselves the opportunity to go to college because they think that window has closed for them.
Yeah. unfortunate. These are certainly unfortunate consequences of the whole situation in which we are now. Looking at the clock, we still have something like 7 or 8 minutes to go, and I certainly would like to do a final round with the panel members on this whole issue of what is now the whole impact of this pandemic on the higher education itself and its link with society. And I here want to bring in this whole issue of, if we go back to the original Brexit days here in Europe, the UK versus the EU, in the UK was said, we have had enough of experts and the whole academic world. They are telling all kinds of stories, but we don't believe them anymore. During the pandemic, of course, the credibility and the appreciation for the academic world and the experts has risen again to huge satisfaction of all of us. I just would like to check with you, how do you see now, after this pandemic, once it is over, how do you see the relationship between higher education and society? Have we been able to restore the balance which was under fire over the past few years? And how do you see your sector and your own institution contributing to this? Let's perhaps start with Francisco, because he has been certainly the engine behind this whole idea also here.
Well, thank you very much, Kurt. And again, thank you, Narimani, for this opportunity to have this session today. You know, there is no doubt, in my opinion, Kurt, that we have lots of room for improvement in connecting more effectively higher education institutions to communities. Let's be very bold about that. You know, globally, our current research incentive is not precisely towards the community orientation. It's much more to the research per se, to the peer review papers published in international journals, etc., etc. Even in some cases, commitment to the community is being punished, is not proper education institutions. So I think we have lots to do on that. And I think the pandemic has basically told us that we need to pay attention to. And of course, that there were many challenges before the pandemic, been exacerbated during the pandemic, and that will be much more critical in the future, and for which we have no choice but connecting our universities much more to the communities in which we are located. We should see the communities not as an accident of geography, but as the reason for us to exist. And I think the pandemic is telling us very clearly that, in order for us to keep relevant our work, we need to be more effectively connected to the community. This is one of the reasons why, again, I really like the approach that is being taken here in Qatar Foundation, because here explicitly, it is clearly connected, education with research, with community development. Those are the three pillars that we believe are fundamental in order to have higher education institutions, as it used to be, the greatest mobilizer of intergenerational support and mobility in our communities and in our societies. There is too much to be done about it. I think what the pandemic is telling us is that we, for the first time, we can say that many of the assumptions that traditionally we had about higher education can be challenged, can be questioned. One of them, for instance, and Ashwin, I'm sure that you and I have had these conversations in the past, is about the value of the rankings. Are the rankings a means or a goal? How do we really make sure that we don't lose the track about what is important in our higher education institutions? And like that, we have learned many things during the pandemic that are basically a wake-up call for us in higher education to connect more effectively to the community.
Okay, thank you very much, Francisco. Wise words. Going to Ashwin, since Francisco also referred to him already on rankings.
I put you on the spot.
Yeah.
No, I think I echo whatever Francisco has said about rankings. I think rankings are generally the outcome of what an institution is doing. Over the next few years, months, we'll see how rankings will transform. And I think what I have captured and what we have captured in our evaluation process, which is QS Stars, is that institutions in the last year have shown much more interest in getting themselves evaluated under community services, and social responsibility, because I've seen institutions which have closed down the whole institution just to accommodate a COVID care hospital in its campus for the period of a couple of months, and I think that's because of our work in India primarily. I'm not sure, and I know in the Middle East, in Saudi, there are some institutions which have provided that as well as the additional COVID care centers. So definitely, the relation between the community and higher education will increase. We will see the community and the stakeholders asking these questions much more than what it was asking before on what is the university, what is the institution doing for the community and surroundings. We will see students getting more engaged, and I think that's where the sustainable development goals will come into play. I've seen in the last couple of months the interest of the youth, of students who are still in school, so engaged on this topic, want to make a difference in the world, with whatever little they can. So I think there is a time which will come where that we will transition into a new world of rankings, hopefully in the next few years, where we'll start to look at what kind of community impact or the societal impact of institutions will also be considered. And that's hopefully what I dream, but there's no dream is impossible, but we have to see how people report this in the future and how this data is available publicly, because there are so many things we would like to include, but probably are not ideal because of data collection challenges. But definitely it is set to change, Kurt.
Okay, thank you very much, Ashwin. Final minutes for Steve.
It's an excellent question. The COVID-19 pandemic, I think it will make a better connection between the university and the community. In the past, university, we always have seen this as being a neutral body, a place where you can convene people to get an unbiased view and to bring a dialogue which is necessary to move ecosystems ahead. Now, if I look at what we've done at Khalifa University, certainly during the pandemic, there was lots of uncertainty. People weren't sure what this was all about, what the health issues were. So we tried to have public forum. We tried to create webinars where academics, which are completely unbiased in the way they look at the world, obviously, they're not representing any company, any industry. They're trying to convey knowledge in a not totally simplistic way, but an accessible way, so that people can understand what's happening in the health system. They can understand the importance of vaccination. You get messages out to people from a neutral body that is connected to science. So I think that connection between science and neutrality and then the public interest we can strengthen. And secondly, I mentioned we were trying to bring a good response to the challenges that the COVID-19 pandemic brought through working with the partners locally and doing things like wastewater testing to see if there's an outbreak of COVID in a certain community, to try to develop rapid diagnostics. We certified our Center for COVID-19 testing, our biotech center. So we did then bring in activities to the university, which we otherwise wouldn't have, which create the value for the community, because we have the experience and the skills to move one level slightly higher in technology readiness spectrum, a little more toward applied research, or in this case, doing something which is actually completely practical, and then bringing that to the perspective of the community versus this thought that the university is all about basic research and ivory tower. So I'm hopeful that this will continue, and there'll be a strong link that's going to continue throughout the coming years as a result of COVID-19.
Thank you very much, Steve. That's spot on. Irma, some last wise words from the United States?
Well, I just want to point out that thanks to international collaboration, we have vaccines to fight this virus. What a better case about the central work that we do to face this virus heads on and to help our nations recover and the world recover. At Marymount also, we have many of our professors engaged even in creating PPEs with 3D printers. Our students are volunteering, vaccinating in the community. So I think that this pandemic has helped us to show the world that we are not ivory tower, that we have rolled up our sleeves, we're faced a common enemy together, and we have conquered, and we will succeed in the face of the pandemic.
Okay, thank you very much, Irma. And I think it's time to close, to wrap up. Before I give the floor again to Narimane, just a few words from my side. I think that we had a very interesting, lively discussion and exchange of ideas. And I think that as very often, this pandemic has been, of course, a terrible thing, but at the same time, it's for institutions like ours, but also for companies like US and others. For many of us, it's also an opportunity, as Francisco said, to review things at a specific moment. Hillary Clinton always said, never waste a good crisis. And I think that many institutions, many companies worldwide, in fact, have done this, have taken this opportunity to look with a pair of fresh eyes again to present situations, present activities, present modus of operandi, and have taken a number of steps based on what they have learned over the past year to improve their activity. So, and I think that as universities, as higher education sector, we have continued to do that. Within LERU, within the League of European Research Universities, we always have the motto that universities are there to guide, but also to serve society. And I think that that is what we have to continue to do through the staff, through the research, through the education, through the students that we train, that this is our mission, and that this mission has been proven and illustrated once again over the past year. With these words, I hand over back to Narimane to wrap up this whole session. Thank you very much to all panel members, and thank you very much to everybody who attended and raised questions in the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. In my turn, I would like to thank all our distinguished panelists as well as our participants and our audience who contributed to the panel. You will see in the chat section a link for you to claim your certificate. And may I inform you and remind you that our next panel will soon be announced on enhancing university social impact during and post COVID-19. So stay tuned to find out more about the coming panel. Until then, please do stay safe, and I hope to see you very soon in another one of our sessions. Thank you very much to our panelists, and I look forward to also working with you in the near future again. Bye-bye. Ma salama.
Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.